Hi there, it's me Finn, and tonight we're going to talk about something fascinating, yet often overlooked in history, the life and skills of medieval blacksmiths. Now you might think that blacksmiths were just the people who hammered iron and forged swords. There's so much more to them than that. What did these skilled men do when they weren't forging weapons? How did they create the most important tools of the time? You might even be surprised by how intricate and sophisticated their craft was. You won't believe what these blacksmiths could do, and how their work shaped the entire medieval world. Let's start by subscribing, and let's dive right in. In medieval times, blacksmiths were not only the creators of weapons and armor, but were among the most respected members of their communities. They worked tirelessly, often with little recognition from history books, creating essential tools, jewelry, and household items, all of which played pivotal roles in the daily life of people. Their craft was learned through apprenticeships that often lasted many years, and the skills they developed were so intricate and precise that only the most skilled could forge the most important and delicate of items. A blacksmith's forge was typically located outside the town, near the village square, or just on the edge of bustling marketplaces. A strong, well-maintained forge was a vital part of the medieval community, producing everything from nails and horseshoes to plows and weapons. This is where the blacksmith would spend long hours, surrounded by the rhythm of hammer on anvil, the roaring sound of the forge's fire, and the smell of burning coal. But it wasn't just about brute strength. Blacksmithing was a delicate art of precision and patience, a craft where skill in fire control and understanding of metal was everything. The forge itself was a thing of wonder. It was a place of immense heat and smoke, where a skilled blacksmith could manipulate glowing metal into just about anything. At the heart of every blacksmith's shop was the forge, a large stone or brick structure that burned coal or charcoal to reach temperatures upwards of 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. In these conditions, iron would melt, making it pliable enough to shape into tools, weapons, and decorative pieces. But getting the fire to that temperature was no small task. It required the mastery of bellows, which would fan air into the fire, causing it to burn hotter. The blacksmith needed to know exactly when to strike the metal, when to cool it, and how to maintain the perfect temperature. A moment's mistake could ruin an entire piece. The tools of a blacksmith were as varied as the work they did. The hammer was the most important of them all. Blacksmiths used a variety of hammers depending on the type of metal they were working with. There were heavy, broad hammers for flattening sheets of metal and lighter, smaller hammers for delicate, detailed work. But it wasn't just about hammers. They had tongs to hold the hot metal, chisels to carve intricate designs, and anvils to provide a sturdy surface on which to hammer the metal. The work was exhausting and dangerous, with molten metal splashing, and the air heavy with the acrid smell of burning coal and the sound of hammer strikes reverberating through the air. Yet, blacksmiths were a vital part of medieval society, and their skills were passed down through generations. A blacksmith's day was long, starting before dawn, and stretching until well after dark. But this wasn't just a job for them, it was their way of life. Every piece of metal they worked on had to be handled with care, precision, and an eye for perfection. A hammer strike too light could make a metal object weak, too hard, and it would shatter. Every movement, every decision made in that forge had an impact. That is why many blacksmiths kept their tools sharp, cleaned, and prepared, knowing that their livelihood depended on their ability to create perfect pieces from raw metal. In fact, blacksmiths were not just limited to making tools and armor. They were responsible for the creation of horseshoes, which were vital to the medieval world where horses were the primary mode of transportation and work. A horse's health and stamina were directly related to the quality of the shoes they wore, so blacksmiths developed techniques to ensure that the shoes would fit properly, last long, and protect the horse's hooves. This was a task that required skill and experience, as working with live animals could be dangerous, but blacksmiths were known for their steady hands, their ability to calm horses, and their knowledge of the anatomy of hooves. But beyond the physical skills involved in shaping metal, there was an art to what blacksmiths did. Metal itself, when heated, had its own character, its own personality. Some metals were brittle and would break easily, others were flexible, bending to the will of the hammer. The blacksmith needed to know how to coax the metal, how to give it shape without overworking it. It was a delicate balance between heat, pressure, and timing. It's almost like the metal itself would reveal its true nature when the blacksmith treated it just right. One of the most fascinating aspects of blacksmithing in the medieval period was the role blacksmiths played in creating intricate decorative items. While most people associate blacksmithing with rugged tools and weapons, there was also a softer side to the craft. Blacksmiths were called upon to create delicate metal jewelry, ceremonial items, and ornate household goods. These items could be made from gold, silver, or copper, and they often featured intricate design. This aspect of blacksmithing was highly respected, as it required both artistic flair and technical skill to execute. They could create tiny ornate brooches or large, beautiful gates with scrolling patterns. In fact, some of the finest pieces of medieval art were created by blacksmiths who took great care to balance form with function. At night, when the forge was quiet, blacksmiths often reflected on their craft, knowing that their work was essential to the survival and advancement of their community. Whether they were forging tools for a farmer, weapons for a soldier, or jewelry for a noble, their contribution to society was immense, even if they rarely received the recognition they deserved. Their work, often hidden in the background of history, was nonetheless fundamental to the success of medieval civilization. It's fascinating, isn't it? The humble blacksmith with nothing but fire and metal could change the world. So much of what we take for granted today, the tools, the machinery, and the art, has its roots in the blacksmith's forge, and yet we often overlook their contribution to history. The next time you hold a tool or see a beautiful piece of metalwork, remember, it could very well have been shaped by the hands of a medieval blacksmith who, despite all odds, mastered the craft that held their world together. Now let's take a moment to breathe. Let's continue with the story. As we continue our journey through the forgotten skills of the medieval blacksmiths, it's important to remember that their craft wasn't limited to the work we usually associate with them today, such as creating swords or armor. No, it was much more fascinating. The blacksmith's shop was in fact a place of constant learning, experimentation, and refinement. The medieval blacksmith's role extended far beyond that of a mere artisan, and the impact of their work reached into almost every aspect of daily life. So let's think about how these blacksmiths became so incredibly skilled, shall we? The truth is, becoming a master blacksmith wasn't something that happened overnight. It took years of training, sometimes decades, to acquire the necessary expertise. Most blacksmiths began their careers as apprentices, working under the watchful eyes of older, more experienced artisans. The apprenticeship system was rigorous, requiring a young apprentice to spend many years learning the trade, sometimes as long as 7 years. During this time they would learn the basic techniques of working with metal, how to forge, shape, and temper metal, how to use various tools, and how to maintain their forge. But that was just the beginning. Once an apprentice had learned the basic skills, they would often begin working on more complex projects, such as creating tools for the community, or assisting with larger, more intricate pieces. The training would continue, with the apprentice gradually taking on more responsibility, until they were able to craft entire pieces on their own. This process, though long, allowed the apprentice to gain a deep understanding of the craft, and it was through this hands-on experience that the most skilled blacksmiths emerged. What's truly remarkable is that, over time, blacksmiths began to develop their own unique techniques and methods, which would then be passed down through generations. Each blacksmith had their own style, their own signature marks, and their own approach to shaping metal. And though much of their work was utilitarian, there was also a great deal of artistry involved. The precision with which a blacksmith could shape and mold metal was extraordinary. It wasn't just about creating something functional, it was about creating something that was aesthetically pleasing as well. One of the most interesting aspects of blacksmithing during the medieval period was the evolution of metalworking tools. Early on, blacksmiths used simple hammers, anvils, and tongs to manipulate metal, but over time, more specialized tools were developed. There were chisels for creating intricate designs, files for smoothing rough edges, and bellows for controlling the heat of the fire. These tools were incredibly important because the blacksmith had to be able to control every aspect of the metalworking process. If the metal wasn't heated to the right temperature, or if it was hammered incorrectly, it could ruin the entire piece. As blacksmiths continued to refine their craft, they also began to experiment with different types of metals. In the early medieval period, iron was the most commonly used metal, but as time passed, blacksmiths began to work with other materials, such as steel, bronze, and even precious metals like gold and silver. Steel in particular became an important material for blacksmiths, as it was stronger and more durable than iron. In fact, the ability to forge steel was one of the hallmarks of an experienced blacksmith. But working with steel wasn't easy. It required precise temperature control and an understanding of the metal's properties. The blacksmith had to know when the metal was hot enough to be forged, and when it was too hot and would burn. The process of tempering steel, which involved cooling it rapidly in water, was also crucial to creating high-quality metalwork. A blacksmith's skill in forging steel was often put to the test when they were asked to create weapons for soldiers. These weapons, such as swords, axes and spears, were highly sought after, and a good blacksmith's reputation rested on their ability to forge a strong and reliable weapon. Making a sword, for example, was an art in itself. The blacksmith had to carefully shape the blade, sharpen the edge, and ensure that it was balanced properly. A poorly made sword could break during battle, and that was something no soldier wanted, so the blacksmith's work had to be perfect. It had to be strong, durable, and finely crafted. But it wasn't just soldiers who relied on blacksmiths. In fact, blacksmiths were crucial to the survival of the entire medieval community. Without their tools, life would have been much harder. Farmers needed plows and hoes to work the land, while blacksmiths also made nails, locks, and hinges for homes and castles. Without the blacksmith's work, the entire infrastructure of medieval life would have crumbled. Imagine a world without horseshoes, for example. The medieval world was built on horses, and without the blacksmith's skill in forging horseshoes, horses would have been unable to perform the work required of them. The importance of the blacksmith's role was further highlighted by the fact that many blacksmiths worked directly with the church. In medieval Europe, the church played a central role in daily life, and blacksmiths were often called upon to make church bells, crosses and other religious items. These items were crafted with great care and attention to detail, as they held significant religious and symbolic meaning. A well-crafted bell could be heard ringing for miles, marking the passage of time and signaling important events, while a beautifully made cross could serve as a reminder of faith. And let's not forget the blacksmith's role in shaping the medieval economy. Their work wasn't just about making things, it was about creating wealth. Blacksmiths were often highly regarded members of society, and their services were in demand. In some towns, blacksmiths were even granted special privileges, such as the ability to charge higher prices for their work, or the right to own property. The craft of blacksmithing was considered an essential trade, and those who excelled in it could build prosperous lives for themselves and their families. It's amazing to think that so much of medieval life was dependent on the humble blacksmith. Without them, nothing would have been possible. They were the unseen workers, the unsung heroes who, with their fire and metal, shaped the world as we know it. If you take a moment to think about all the things around you that are made from metal, remember the blacksmith's craft was at the heart of it all. Now let's pause for a bit, and let's continue with the story. As we move forward in our exploration of the forgotten skills of medieval blacksmiths, let's take a deeper look into some of the more intriguing aspects of their work. Beyond the creation of tools and weapons, blacksmiths were incredibly resourceful craftsmen who could turn raw metal into something more than just functional. They could transform it into art, symbols, and even wealth. In their hands, metal became not just a tool for survival, but a tool for expression, tradition, and status. As we consider how blacksmiths contributed to the lives of kings, nobles, and everyday folk alike, we also begin to understand how they helped define the social and cultural landscapes of medieval society. You might be wondering, what did blacksmiths create for the elite? Were they just making swords and shields, or was there more? Well, yes, there was a lot more. Let's take a look at how blacksmiths were involved in the creation of symbols of status and power. For instance, in the medieval world, a knight's armor was a reflection of not just military might, but also wealth and rank. Blacksmiths were often tasked with creating intricate pieces of armor for knights, pieces that were both protective and ornamental. But what made medieval armor so fascinating was the attention to detail. The blacksmith didn't just forge a suit of armor, they created a work of art. Armors were often decorated with elaborate designs, including engraved patterns, etchings of animals, or even family crests. These designs told a story. They symbolized a knight's lineage, his loyalty to his lord, and his honor. And this is where blacksmithing became not just a functional skill but an expressive one. The forging of armor became a symbolic representation of power and nobility, one that could be passed down through generations. Interestingly, blacksmiths also played an important role in the world of medieval horse equipment. Knights weren't just warriors on foot, they were often seen on horseback. And like the armor they wore, the gear they used for their horses was a sign of their prestige. Horse armor, saddles, bridles, and stirrups were often crafted by blacksmiths, and they too were designed with careful precision. In fact, the development of the stirrup, a simple yet incredibly important invention, was a breakthrough for medieval cavalry, making it possible for knights to ride and fight more effectively.
The stirrup allowed knights to maintain their balance while wielding heavy weapons, and as a result, it revolutionized warfare in medieval times. But without the blacksmith, the stirrup would have never been forged. The forging of weapons, particularly swords, was one of the most prestigious tasks a blacksmith could undertake. Medieval swords were not simply tools of war, they were symbols of honor and nobility. The process of making a sword was complex and meticulous, and it was often seen as a rite of passage for a blacksmith. To make a sword, the blacksmith would start with a large piece of iron or steel, heat it in the forge until it was glowing hot, and then hammer it into the desired shape. But the shaping of the blade wasn't enough. The blacksmith also had to ensure the metal was strong enough to withstand the blows of battle. This was done by a process called quenching, rapidly cooling the hot metal in water or oil to harden it. It was an extremely delicate process, as the wrong temperature or timing could cause the blade to crack. And then there was the art of the sword's handle. The hilt of the sword was where the blacksmith's craftsmanship truly shone through. The handle wasn't just a functional part of the sword, it was a statement. It was often adorned with elaborate carvings, gemstones or precious metals. Some blacksmiths were even commissioned to create hilts with intricate designs, such as those depicting animals or mythical creatures. The sword wasn't just a weapon, it was a piece of art that symbolized the warrior's identity. Now let's step back for a moment and think about how the blacksmith's role in the creation of these magnificent weapons and armors influenced the world of medieval warfare. The medieval knight, with his shining armor and gleaming sword, was the epitome of chivalry, courage and honor. But behind every knight was the blacksmith, who quietly worked away in the forge, crafting the very tools that made those ideals a reality. Without the blacksmith, the knights would have been no more than soldiers with nothing to protect them. However, blacksmithing wasn't just about creating beautiful and powerful things for the elite. No, blacksmiths also provided essential tools to the peasantry. Without blacksmiths, the farmers would not have had the plows to cultivate the land, the blacksmiths wouldn't have created the nails needed to build houses, and the blacksmiths wouldn't have forged the horseshoes that kept the livestock healthy. In many ways, the blacksmith was the backbone of medieval society, supporting not only the warriors, but also the workers, the tradespeople, and the everyday men and women who lived in the medieval world. But what about the blacksmith's work beyond the physical object? What did it mean for a blacksmith to take on the role of a craftsman? In many ways, blacksmiths were seen as mystical figures. They were experts in the manipulation of metal, a skill that was seen as magical by many. The blacksmith's forge, with its fire and glowing coals, was a place where transformation occurred. The raw metal would be shaped into something entirely new, something that could be used to protect, defend, or adorn. The blacksmith was a master of this transformation, and in a society that often relied on superstitions, the blacksmith was sometimes seen as a person who had tapped into a secret knowledge. Their ability to turn metal into something beautiful and functional was a kind of magic. And let's not forget the blacksmith's role in the creation of everyday household items. The medieval blacksmiths didn't just work for the elite, they worked for everyone. They forged pots, pans, cauldrons and other necessary items used in daily life. They crafted items that would be used in the kitchen, in the home and in the fields. The blacksmith's work was so integral to the success of medieval society that it was a skill that was passed down from father to son, generation after generation. It's truly amazing how much the blacksmith influenced medieval life. It's often said that behind every great knight there was a skilled blacksmith, and it's not an exaggeration. The blacksmith's work wasn't just about making tools and weapons, it was about shaping the very fabric of society. The legacy of the blacksmith lives on, not just in the tools we use today, but in the way we understand craftsmanship and dedication. So the next time you hold a hammer or a sword, remember, it's not just a piece of metal, it's the result of centuries of skill, tradition and artistry. Let's continue. As we move into the next chapter of our exploration into the forgotten skills of medieval blacksmiths, let's delve deeper into the personal lives of these crafts. Behind every anvil and forge was a person, often working long, grueling hours, creating objects that would support the survival of entire communities. Yet there's something fascinating and almost poetic about the lifestyle of the blacksmith. They weren't just laborers, they were craftsmen, with skills that were passed down from one generation to the next, honing their trade in ways that made them crucial to the very survival and prosperity of the medieval world. Now, let's take a moment to consider the day-to-day life of a blacksmith. What did it really look like to be a blacksmith in the medieval era? Well, let's begin by understanding the physical demands of the craft. Blacksmithing was hard, back-breaking work. The forge itself was a hot, dark place, filled with the constant sound of hammering. Blacksmiths spent their days working with heavy tools and metals that were heated to extreme temperatures, their bodies contorted in strange ways as they worked the metal into shape. It wasn't just about the artistry, it was about strength, stamina, and an incredible amount of patience. For those living in smaller villages or rural areas, blacksmiths often lived in close proximity to their workshop. Their homes were usually modest, simple stone or timber buildings, with a living area attached to the forge. It was common for the blacksmith family to be involved in the work as well, with apprenticeships starting from a young age. Many blacksmiths had sons or daughters who would eventually take up the trade. The shop and the home were intertwined, creating a space where both the craft and the family life blended together seamlessly. Interestingly, blacksmiths were also responsible for maintaining the tools of the tradespeople around them. Farmers, carpenters and other skilled laborers relied heavily on the blacksmith for repairs, whether it was fixing a broken tool or crafting new ones. The blacksmith's work often extended beyond the forge itself, meaning that these craftsmen were highly involved in the ongoing rhythm of daily life. They knew every detail of the local economy and every need of their neighbors. They were the silent partners in the community, working quietly to ensure everything from farming to building could continue without a hitch. But despite the long hours and physical demands of the work, there was a certain pride in being a blacksmith. The craft itself was a matter of personal honor. Blacksmiths prided themselves on the quality of their work, which was often marked with personal signatures or symbols. Their items were expected to last for years, and a blacksmith's reputation depended on the durability and craftsmanship of their creations. In fact, many of the best blacksmiths became well known within their communities, respected for their ability to make tools and weapons that could withstand the toughest challenges. For those in larger towns or cities, blacksmiths played an even more important role. They were often part of a larger network of tradespeople, creating goods that would be traded or sold in the marketplace. In these bustling towns, blacksmiths often worked alongside other craftsmen, such as carpenters, masons and weavers, creating a vibrant hub of activity. The workshops of blacksmiths were busy places, filled with the sounds of the forge, the sharp clink of tools and the hum of social interaction. They would exchange knowledge and ideas with other tradespeople, sometimes collaborating to create more complex products. In medieval cities, blacksmiths often worked for the local lord or nobleman, who would commission them to forge weapons, armor or ceremonial items. These blacksmiths were considered some of the finest artisans in the land, as the quality of their work reflected not just their skill, but the wealth and prestige of the lord they served. Serving the nobility was no small feat, as it required a high level of skill and expertise. Some blacksmiths worked in royal forges, producing swords, armor and even intricate items like chandeliers or gates for castles. These blacksmiths were highly sought after, and their creations were considered prized possessions. In addition to the physical demands, blacksmithing also required mental agility. The blacksmith had to understand not only the properties of metal but also the physics of forging, the way the metal would bend, the way heat affected its structure, and how to cool it at the right moment were all important aspects of the craft. A skilled blacksmith had to be able to think on their feet, quickly making decisions that could make or break a piece of work. It was this combination of physical strength and mental skill that made blacksmithing such a unique and respected trade. But blacksmithing wasn't just about making tools and weapons. It was about making a living, providing for a family, and playing an integral part in the community. Many blacksmiths had large families, and their children often took over the trade once they reached adulthood. This passing down of knowledge from generation to generation helped ensure the survival of the craft for centuries. In fact, the craft of blacksmithing continued to thrive well into the early modern period, with many of the tools and techniques still in use today. Yet, there were also darker aspects to the life of a blacksmith. The work was dangerous, and the risk of injury was high. Working with molten metal, sharp tools and large hammers meant that accidents were common. Blacksmiths often worked without proper safety gear, and their bodies were marked with burns, cuts and other injuries. Despite this, blacksmiths were known for their resilience and toughness. The injuries they suffered were often seen as badges of honor, a testament to the hardships they faced in their craft. And beyond the physical toll, blacksmiths often lived in a world filled with superstition. In medieval times, many people believed that blacksmiths had a special connection to the supernatural world. The forge, with its fire and smoke, was seen as a place of transformation, and some believed that blacksmiths had the power to shape not just metal, but the very forces of nature. Some blacksmiths were even thought to possess magical powers, and their work was shrouded in mystery and reverence. This connection to the supernatural was particularly evident in the making of certain items, like horseshoes, which were believed to ward off evil spirits. It's amazing to think about the life of a blacksmith, isn't it? Behind every hammer strike there's a story. Every piece of metal forged holds the legacy of a hard-working craftsman. The blacksmith's life wasn't easy, but it was full of meaning. They weren't just making tools, they were making the very framework of medieval society, from the smallest nail to the grandest suit of armor. And now, let's breathe and continue on our journey. As we step deeper into the intricate world of the medieval blacksmith, we begin to see more clearly the layers of their craft, their culture and their contributions to history. So far, we've talked about the physical demands of the job, the tools they used, and the way their work shaped both everyday life and the higher echelons of society. But there's something even more fascinating that needs to be explored: the cultural impact of blacksmith, and how their work connected them not just to metal, but to the very essence of medieval life. Let's take a moment and reflect. What did blacksmiths really represent in the medieval world? They weren't just workers, they were artisans, craftsmen who wielded a kind of power that others didn't quite understand. They worked with fire and metal, two of the most primal forces, and turned them into something useful, something beautiful. But more than that, they held the key to progress in medieval society. Without them, how could people have built houses, plowed fields, or traveled from one place to another? How would knights have prepared for battle? Blacksmiths, though often anonymous in their work, were at the heart of it all.
Let's now consider how blacksmiths were integrated into the social fabric of medieval life. Blacksmithing was one of the oldest trades passed down through generations, and it was often a family business. The blacksmith's family would work together in the forge, each member contributing to the overall success of the operation. Sons would follow in their father's footsteps, learning the trade through apprenticeships that began as early as childhood. It wasn't uncommon for a young boy to spend years in the forge, learning the craft piece by piece, from striking the metal to understanding the properties of different kinds of metal. The blacksmith's role extended far beyond that of a mere tradesperson. In many ways, the blacksmith was seen as a figure of authority within their community. Their skill and expertise gave them a status that often placed them on par with, or even above, other tradespeople. This was especially true in larger towns and cities, where blacksmiths were often called upon to create weapons, armor, and other essential items for the nobility. As a result, they were highly respected members of medieval society. They were the ones who helped defend the kingdom with their weapons, who helped farmers plow the land with their tools, and who provided the materials needed to keep society running. In fact, the blacksmith's role was so crucial that in some cases they were granted privileges by the local lord. They might be given land, special rights, or even exemptions from certain taxes in exchange for their essential services. In this way, blacksmiths were able to build prosperous lives for themselves and their family. And yet, despite this status, blacksmiths often lived relatively simple lives, spending long hours in their forges and rarely venturing outside their immediate surroundings. Their work was their world, and the forge was both their home and their livelihood. But there's another layer to the blacksmith's role that often goes unnoticed: their place in the mythology and superstition of medieval society. You see, blacksmiths weren't just seen as craftsmen. They were often thought to possess magical power. The forge, with its fire and heat, was a place of transformation, where raw materials were turned into objects of utility, beauty, and strength. In medieval times, fire was seen as a powerful force, a force of both destruction and creation. Blacksmiths who could manipulate this force were sometimes considered to possess a kind of mystical power. In fact, many blacksmiths were believed to have supernatural ability. Some were even thought to be able to craft items that had magical properties, such as horseshoes that would protect against evil spirits. The blacksmith's ability to tame fire and transform metal into useful objects gave them a kind of otherworldly state. This connection to fire, combined with their skill in forging, elevated blacksmiths to a position of both respect and reverence in many medieval communities. It's curious how blacksmiths, through their work with metal, could be seen as possessing such a unique power. But perhaps it's not so strange when we think about how essential they were to life in the medieval world. They were, after all, the creators of everything from the nails that held buildings together to the swords that protected kingdom. Their work was woven into the very fabric of life itself, and as a result, they were seen as figures of importance, not just for their practical skills but for the symbolic power they represented. When it comes to blacksmithing, there's also the cultural significance of the objects they craft. It's easy to think of blacksmiths only as the makers of tools and weapons, but their craft also involved the creation of decorative items, religious artifacts, and luxury goods. In fact, some blacksmiths were highly skilled artisans who created intricate jewelry, ceremonial items, and even artistic works that were highly prized. These objects weren't just functional, they were also works of art, reflecting the beauty and creativity of the blacksmith. These items, often made from precious metals, like gold or silver, were worn by nobles and royalty, who saw them not only as symbols of wealth, but as symbols of their connection to the craftsmanship of the blacksmith. Take, for example, the making of rings, brooches, and other adornments for the wealthy. These weren't just simple pieces of jewelry. They were often intricately designed, with detailed engravings, precious stones, and ornate decoration. Blacksmiths would craft these items with as much care and attention as they would a sword or a plow. They were an expression of both artistry and status, showcasing the skill of the blacksmith while also serving as symbols of wealth and power. Moreover, blacksmiths played an important role in the creation of religious artifacts. They forged crosses, candlesticks, and other ceremonial items for churches and monasteries. These items were not only functional but also symbolic of. In many ways, blacksmiths helped shape the spiritual life of medieval society, creating the tools and artifacts that would be used in the service of religion. The work they did in this realm was just as important as the work they did in the world of war and agriculture. It's amazing to think about the multifaceted role blacksmiths played in the medieval world. They were more than just laborers or craftsmen. They were the creators of art, the builders of society, and even the custodians of magic. Through their work with fire and metal, they left a lasting imprint on the world, one that still echoes through the ages. Now let's pause and take in all that we've learned about these extraordinary craftsmen. Ready to continue on our journey? Let's move forward. As we move further into the world of medieval blacksmiths, it's important to focus not only on their contributions to society, but also on the challenges they faced, both personal and professional. The life of a blacksmith was far from easy, and while their craft was highly respected, their day-to-day existence was fraught with difficulty, danger, and a constant struggle to maintain their status within society. In this part of our journey, let's look at the darker side of the blacksmith's life, those challenges that often went unnoticed, but were an integral part of the reality of working in such a physically demanding and highly skilled trade. So let's start by considering the long hours. The work of a medieval blacksmith was never done. There was always metal to shape, weapons to forge, or tools to repair. The forge was a hot, noisy place, and the blacksmith would often spend long hours hammering away, the heat from the fire seeping into their bone. The work was physically exhausting. To make a single sword, for example, a blacksmith might have to heat the metal, hammer it, cool it, and then repeat the process several times to get the blade just right. And this was just for a single weapon. A blacksmith might forge dozens of swords, horseshoes, and plows in a day, each requiring immense effort and concentration. But it wasn't just the physical toll that was difficult. Working with metal, especially in the intense heat of the forge, was dangerous. Blacksmiths often worked without protective gear, their skin exposed to the searing heat of the fire, their hands sometimes burned by the molten metal. The heavy tools they wielded could cause injury if they weren't handled carefully, and the forge itself was a hazardous place. If the fire wasn't properly maintained, it could quickly get out of control. Blacksmiths had to be constantly vigilant, ensuring that the fire was always at the right temperature, and that they were working with the metal at the optimal moment. Despite these dangers, blacksmiths couldn't afford to be careless. Every strike of the hammer had to be precise, and every piece of metal had to be handled with care. But mistakes happened. A blade could be ruined if it wasn't properly tempered, or a horseshoe might be made the wrong side. If a blacksmith made a mistake, it wasn't just a minor issue. It could mean the loss of income, as they would have to start over, wasting valuable time and resources. And then of course there was the constant pressure to perform. Blacksmiths had a reputation to uphold. Their work was critical to the community, and they were expected to produce high-quality items day in and day out. Whether they were making tools for farmers or weapons for soldiers, there was always a demand for their work. In many cases, blacksmiths didn't have the luxury of taking a day off. Their customers depended on them, and if they couldn't meet the demand, there would be consequences. Some blacksmiths would push themselves to work long into the night, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, in order to meet the needs of their clients. What's even more striking is that many blacksmiths lived in a world where their craft was largely invisible to the general population. While they were essential to the functioning of the community, they often didn't receive the recognition they deserved. Many blacksmiths worked in small, dimly lit shops, away from the bustle of the market square. Their work was often done in isolation, and though their tools and creations were used by many, their personal stories rarely made it into the history books. The work they did was sometimes seen as just another part of everyday life, and in the rush of society's demands, the blacksmith was often overlooked. Another aspect of the blacksmith's life that is seldom discussed is the strain it placed on family life. Many blacksmiths worked in small, cramped spaces, and their families lived in close quarters. While this allowed families to stay connected, it also meant that they were often surrounded by the noise, heat, and danger of the forge. The blacksmith's children would often start working at a very young age, learning the craft from their parents, but this meant that many of them spent their formative years working in a place that was loud, hot, and dangerous. This type of life was hard for a child, and while many apprentices grew to appreciate the skill of blacksmithing, others found it stifling and difficult. In some ways, the work of a blacksmith was seen as a noble trade, but in other ways it was considered a grueling, exhausting existence. Blacksmiths were often working-class people, their skill and status acknowledged, but not always rewarded in a way that reflected their importance. The physical toll of the work, the long hours, and the danger that came with working in the forge made blacksmithing a difficult life. But even though they were often taken for granted, blacksmiths continued to work tirelessly, day after day, crafting the items that allowed medieval society to function. It's also worth noting that despite these difficulties, the blacksmith's role in society was often considered one of great dignity. They weren't just ordinary tradespeople, they were the ones who forged the tools of civilization. They created the weapons that allowed kingdoms to defend themselves, the tools that allowed farmers to grow food, and the metal objects that made life easier. And even though their work was often physically demanding, they took great pride in it. A blacksmith knew that their work was important, that it was vital to the survival of their community. This sense of pride, even in the face of hardship, was one of the defining characteristics of the medieval blacksmith. It's quite moving when you think about it, isn't it? The life of a blacksmith was a constant balance between pride and pain, between the satisfaction of creating something useful and the physical toll it took on their body. Despite the hardships, blacksmiths continued their craft, shaping the world around them with their hammers, anvils and forges. It's amazing to consider how these craftsmen, though often overlooked, played such a crucial role in shaping the medieval world. Now let's continue with the story. As we continue our journey into the life and craft of medieval blacksmiths, we now turn our attention to the fascinating world of blacksmithing tools and techniques. It's one thing to think of the blacksmith as someone who spends their days hammering metal into shape, but it's another to understand the true complexity and skill involved in their work. The tools they used were as much a part of their identity as the metal they worked with. Each tool had a purpose, a design that catered to a specific task, and the mastery of each was a testament to the blacksmith's expertise. So let's take a closer look at the tools of the trade, and the techniques that made blacksmithing such a precise and remarkable art. First, let's consider the anvil. The anvil was the heart of the blacksmith's workshop. It was a large, solid block of metal, typically made of iron or steel, mounted on a heavy wooden base. The surface of the anvil was smooth, allowing the blacksmith to shape hot metal with precision. It was here that the metal would be hammered, bent and shaped into its final form. But the anvil wasn't just a flat surface, it had various parts that served different purposes. The horn of the anvil, for example, was a rounded section at one end, that was used to form curves or to bend metal. The face was the flat part of the anvil, where most of the hammering took place, and the punch hole was used for making indentations or holes in the metal. The anvil was truly the cornerstone of the blacksmith's shop, and its design had been perfected over centuries of trial and error. Another essential tool for a blacksmith was the hammer. Hammers came in many shapes and sizes, each designed for a specific type of work. The most common hammer was the sledgehammer, a large, heavy tool used for shaping metal. It had a long handle and a broad head, and it was used for striking large pieces of metal. The ball-peen hammer was another type, smaller and more precise, with a round end that allowed the blacksmith to perform finer work. Each hammer had its own role in the workshop, and the blacksmith had to be skilled at knowing which hammer to use and when. Hammering, after all, wasn't just about brute force, it was about precision and technique. A single incorrect strike could ruin an entire piece of work, so the blacksmith had to use the right hammer at the right time. Then there was the tongs. Tongs were used to hold and manipulate hot metal, keeping the blacksmith's hands safe from the intense heat of the forge. There were different types of tongs for different tasks. Some had wide, flat jaws for holding large pieces of metal, while others had more pointed jaws for gripping smaller pieces or delicate items. Tongs were essential for moving metal from the forge to the anvil and for holding it in place while it was being worked. Without tongs, the blacksmith would have been unable to safely handle the metal, and the risk of burns or other injuries would have been far greater. The bellows were another critical tool in the blacksmith's workshop. Bellows were used to pump air into the forge, increasing the temperature of the fire. The blacksmith needed to control the temperature of the fire carefully, as the metal had to be heated to the exact right temperature in order to be worked. Too hot, and the metal could burn or become too soft. Too cool, and it wouldn't be malleable enough to shape. The bellows were a simple but ingenious invention, consisting of a large wooden chamber with a set of leather bellows attached. The blacksmith would pump the bellows to force air into the fire, raising the temperature and allowing the metal to reach the ideal heat for forging. The bellows were crucial to the entire process, and without them, the forge would have been useless. In addition to these primary tools, blacksmiths also used a variety of smaller tools to refine their work. Files were used to smooth rough edges and create fine details. Chisels were used for carving intricate patterns into metal, and punches were used to create holes or indentations. There were also specialized tools for making specific items. For example, the horseshoe tool was designed to shape the metal into the curved shape needed for a horse's shoe, while the blade tool was used to create the sharp edge of a sword. Each of these tools played a specific role in the blacksmith's work,
and mastering them was essential for producing high-quality metalwork. One of the most fascinating aspects of blacksmithing was the development of new techniques over time. As blacksmiths experimented with different metals and methods, they were able to create increasingly sophisticated pieces. One such technique was called welding, a process by which two pieces of metal were joined together by heating them to a high temperature and then hammering them together. This technique allowed blacksmiths to create larger and more complex pieces of metalwork, such as swords with multiple layers or intricate ironwork for buildings. Another important technique was tempering, which involved heating the metal to a certain temperature and then rapidly cooling it in water or oil. This process made the metal harder and more durable, giving it the strength needed to withstand use in battle or in everyday life. Tempering was particularly important for weapons, as a sword or axe needed to be both sharp and strong, but the tempering process was delicate. Too much heat, and the metal could become brittle; too little and it wouldn't be strong enough. The blacksmith had to know exactly when to remove the metal from the fire and when to cool it, and this required years of experience and careful observation. As we can see, blacksmithing was not just a physical craft but a mental one as well. The blacksmith had to be knowledgeable about the properties of different metals, how to control the temperature of the forge, and when to use the right tool for the job. It was a constant balancing act between heat, pressure and technique, and it required a level of expertise that few could achieve. But for those who mastered the craft, the rewards were great. Blacksmithing was a trade that allowed individuals to create beautiful, functional and durable objects, things that would last for generations. When you really think about it, the tools of the trade were an extension of the blacksmith's very skill. Each hammer, each tongs, each file was a reflection of their craftsmanship and expertise. These tools were not just instruments, they were the key to unlocking the magic of transformation from raw, shapeless metal into something useful, beautiful and lasting. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on all of this. As we continue our exploration of the remarkable life and craft of medieval blacksmiths, let's shift our focus to something equally fascinating: the social, economic and spiritual dimensions of blacksmith. Beyond the hammer strikes and glowing forge, blacksmiths were deeply embedded in the fabric of medieval society. They weren't just laborers or craftsmen, they were essential to the functioning of medieval communities, playing roles that went far beyond what we typically think of when we imagine their work. So let's consider this. How did blacksmiths fit into the broader social structure? Blacksmiths were at the crossroads of nearly every trade. Their work was required by nearly every part of society, from farmers to soldiers, to nobles and merchants. In medieval times, a blacksmith wasn't just a person who forged iron. They were a central figure in the community, providing tools, repairs and items of both practical use and great value. Let's think about how this vital role shaped their relationships with others, how they interacted with their customers, and how they built their status in the community. In medieval villages and towns, blacksmiths were often one of the few craftsmen with a stable and consistent demand for their services. A village could function without a baker or a weaver, but it could never operate without a blacksmith. They forged the horseshoes that made transportation possible, the plows that helped farmers grow their crops, and the nails that held buildings together. As a result, blacksmiths were often seen as some of the most important members of society. Without them, everyday life would have ground to a halt. Yet despite their importance, blacksmiths didn't always enjoy the same social status as some other tradespeople. In some regions, blacksmiths were classified as working class or even lower class, largely because of the physical labor their work required. They were often seen as rough and gritty individuals, working with fire and metal all day long. In a society that placed great value on cleanliness, blacksmiths, covered in soot and ash, didn't always fit the ideal of a noble or refined person, and yet despite this, they earned a level of respect that was unmatched by most other trades. There was a certain awe that surrounded them, born from the mystical nature of their craft. The ability to work with fire and forge metal was considered magical by many, and the blacksmith's ability to turn raw materials into objects of use and beauty was a source of admiration. This respect was especially evident in the towns and cities, where blacksmiths were often granted privileges that other tradespeople did not enjoy. In some places they were given exemptions from taxes or special rights to work for the local lord or nobility. In return, they provided essential goods and services, not just to the people in their villages, but also to the wealthy elite. This created a kind of symbiotic relationship. The blacksmiths provided the tools and weapons of the elite, while the elite provided them with patronage and economic support. But despite their prominent role in the community, blacksmiths often lived modest lives. Most blacksmiths didn't accumulate wealth the way merchants or noblemen might, as the cost of their materials and the labor-intensive nature of their work kept their profits relatively low. They worked tirelessly, often from dawn until dusk, and their homes were often attached to their workshops, which were little more than small practical spaces. Their existence was one of constant work, hammering, heating and shaping metal day in and day out. But there was more to the blacksmith's role than just creating tools and items for the community. In many ways, blacksmiths were also deeply connected to the spiritual life of the time. In medieval Europe, metalworking was often linked to religious symbolism, and blacksmiths were sometimes seen as the ones who could bridge the earthly and spiritual realms. The forge, with its intense heat and its fire, was believed to have transformative properties, not just for metal but for the person working it. Many believed that blacksmiths were gifted with supernatural abilities, especially in the creation of sacred items like crosses, chalices and bells. Blacksmiths who worked for the church, for example, had the important task of creating ceremonial items for religious services. These objects weren't just functional, they were imbued with a sense of divine importance. A beautifully forged church bell could represent the voice of God, and a finely crafted chalice could symbolize the holy blood of Christ. The blacksmith, then, wasn't just creating functional items for the everyday world, they were also playing a role in the spiritual life of the community. This connection to the divine gave blacksmiths a sense of sacred purpose, as they were tasked with creating items that held both practical and religious significance. In addition, the act of forging metal was seen by some as an act of purification. The intense heat of the forge, the pounding of the hammer, the transformation of the raw metal into something useful, it was a process that mirrored spiritual transformation. In this sense, blacksmithing was more than just a craft. It was a metaphor for the purification of the soul, a way of refining something crude and making it valuable, both in the material and spiritual sense. In some regions, blacksmiths even became associated with certain saints or religious symbols. For example, Aloy, the patron saint of blacksmiths, was said to be a blacksmith himself. He was known for his skill in working with metal, and his association with blacksmithing was so strong that many medieval blacksmiths would invoke his name for good luck and protection as they worked. The connection between blacksmithing and spirituality was deeply ingrained in the culture of the time, and blacksmiths often saw their work as not just a trade, but a divine calling. Another important element to consider is the fact that blacksmiths were sometimes seen as the keepers of local traditions. In many towns and villages, blacksmiths were the ones who passed down the techniques and methods of metalworking from generation to generation. Their shops were often family-run businesses, and apprentices would learn the craft from their fathers or grandfathers. In this way, the blacksmith was both a skilled worker and a keeper of cultural heritage, ensuring that ancient techniques were preserved for future generations. When you really think about it, the blacksmith was so much more than just a laborer. They were central to the community both spiritually and practically. They were the creators of the tools that allowed society to function, the makers of the weapons that protected it, and the craftsmen who infused their work with beauty and meaning. The blacksmith's life was one of quiet dedication, constant work, and an ever-present connection to the forces of fire, metal and tradition. It's incredible how such a humble craft could have such a lasting impact on the world. Let's pause and breathe for a moment, taking in the depth of the blacksmith's contribution to history. Now let's continue, shall we? As we continue delving deeper into the life and craft of medieval blacksmiths, we now come to an aspect that is both fascinating and somewhat mysterious: the lasting legacy of the blacksmith's influence on modern-day life. It's remarkable how the skills, techniques and tools that were developed in the medieval forge still have their fingerprints on the world today. The blacksmith's legacy isn't just confined to the past, it continues to shape the world in ways that many of us might not even realize. So how did the work of these medieval artisans influence the world we live in today? When we think of the modern world, we think of advanced machinery, technology and mass production. But at the heart of all of these innovations is a craft that has remained remarkably unchanged for centuries: metalwork. The principles of forging, shaping and welding metal that were developed by blacksmiths in the medieval period are still the foundation of much of the work that goes on in metal factories, construction sites and even in art studios. Let's start by thinking about how the blacksmith's role in society has evolved over time. While blacksmiths were once central figures in their communities, their role began to shift with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. During this time, mass production and mechanization began to take over many of the tasks that were once done by hand. The small, family-run blacksmith shop began to be replaced by factories, where machines would produce mass quantities of metal product. Despite this shift, the fundamental skills of blacksmithing, working with fire and metal, remained the same. Even today, many of the techniques and tools used by medieval blacksmiths are still used by metal workers and blacksmiths around the world. The forge, the anvil, the hammer, they are all still essential tools in modern metalworking. While modern technology has certainly made the process faster and more efficient, the core principles remain rooted in the ancient art of blacksmithing. There are still blacksmiths today who work by hand, creating everything from custom swords and knives to decorative iron gates and furniture. These craftsmen continue to uphold the traditions that have been passed down through the centuries, preserving the craft and ensuring that it remains relevant in the modern world. Think about how many objects we interact with every day that have been shaped by the blacksmith's craft, from the door hinges and locks that keep our homes secure, to the intricate metal railings and sculptures that adorn buildings and parks. Metalworking continues to be a crucial part of our daily lives. Even something as simple as a horseshoe, a piece of equipment that was once vital to medieval life, still plays a role in the modern world. Though horses are no longer the primary means of transportation, farriers, the modern-day blacksmiths, still shoe horses, keeping them healthy and ensuring they can perform their work.
The blacksmith influence also extends into the world of weaponry. While medieval swords and armor may no longer be used in battle, the techniques developed by blacksmiths for forging and tempering metal were the precursors to the weapons we use today. The development of modern steel alloys, for example, owes much to the work of blacksmiths who spent years experimenting with different metals and techniques to create stronger, more durable weapons. The knowledge of metallurgy that blacksmiths developed in the medieval period laid the groundwork for the development of the weapons and tools that have shaped history. Moreover, the art of blacksmithing has left its mark on modern-day artistry. Blacksmiths in the medieval period were not only concerned with creating practical objects, they were also artists, crafting beautifully designed ironwork, jewelry, and other ornamental objects. This artistic side of blacksmithing has been passed down through the generations, and today, many metal artists still draw inspiration from the intricate designs created by their medieval counterparts. In fact, the decorative metalwork seen in Gothic architecture and the fine jewelry crafted during the Middle Ages continue to inspire modern-day artisans. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the blacksmith's craft is in the way it has shaped our understanding of craftsmanship itself. Blacksmiths were not just makers, they were true artisans, carefully shaping and refining their materials to create something of lasting value. This attention to detail and dedication to quality is something that modern artisans and craftsmen still aspire to today. The blacksmith's legacy is one of patience, skill, and respect for the materials they worked with. In a world where mass production and disposable goods often dominate, the blacksmith's commitment to creating durable, meaningful items stands as a reminder of the importance of craftsmanship and artistry. Let's take a moment to think about this. How the work of a medieval blacksmith with their hands shaped by fire and metal still lives on in the very things we use today. Whether it's the structure of a building, the design of a piece of art, or the tools we use in our daily lives, the blacksmith influence is still very much alive. As we reflect on this, we can see that blacksmiths were more than just craftsmen. They were pioneers, innovators, and artists whose contributions continue to shape our world. They were the architects of civilization in a very real sense, providing the tools and materials that made modern society possible. And while their forges may have cooled, their legacy continues to burn bright in the work that we do and the tools that we use. It's truly amazing to see how their influence has endured for so long, isn't it? Let's continue on with our journey through the world of medieval blacksmiths. As we continue our exploration of the fascinating and often overlooked world of medieval blacksmiths, it's time to delve into a more personal aspect of their lives. How the craft itself shaped not only their work, but their identity, their families, and their relationships with the wider community. The life of a blacksmith wasn't just about creating tools and weapons. It was about legacy, family tradition, and a sense of belonging that went beyond the forge. Today, we'll take a closer look at the blacksmith's role as a family member, a mentor, and a symbol of perseverance, and how these aspects of their life left a lasting imprint on the craft and the communities they served. When we think of medieval blacksmiths, we often picture them as solitary figures working alone in a dark, smoky workshop. However, the truth is far more communal. Blacksmiths, like many other artisans of the time, worked closely with their families. In fact, blacksmithing was often a family business, passed down from one generation to the next. The father, the master blacksmith, would teach his son the trade, and this apprenticeship could begin as early as a child's 6th or 7th year. The craft was learned through hands-on experience, where children would spend hours at their father's side, carefully watching and learning how to handle metal, shape it, and forge it in the heat of the fire. This close-knit family structure was essential to the blacksmith's work. Many blacksmiths, especially in rural villages or smaller towns, worked alongside their wives and children. The wife might manage the household and help in small ways around the forge, while the children often took on smaller tasks, such as collecting coal, lighting the fire, or assisting with basic tasks in the workshop. This system not only provided the blacksmith with the support needed to maintain a steady workflow, but also helped create a deep sense of family unity and shared purpose. The work of the blacksmith was not just about individual achievement, it was about passing down knowledge and ensuring the survival of a craft that was essential to the community. For the blacksmith there was a great deal of pride in this tradition. The work was hard, but it was also highly respected. The blacksmith knew that by teaching his children the trade, he was ensuring that his craft and his legacy would live on. This generational continuity was central to the blacksmith's identity. It wasn't just about making tools or weapons, it was about creating a family legacy that would stand the test of time. It was an intimate, yet deeply personal way of contributing to society. Every strike of the hammer, every piece of metal that was shaped, carried with it the hopes of continuing a family tradition that had lasted for generations. Think about the impact of this family dynamic. For the blacksmith's children, growing up in a forge meant learning more than just a craft. It meant learning the values of hard work, perseverance and pride in one's work. Many blacksmiths took pride in their ability to teach their children not only the technical aspects of blacksmithing, but also the ethics that came with it. The blacksmith taught his children to be patient, to be diligent, and to understand that mastery didn't come quickly. It took years of hard work and dedication. These lessons would serve the children throughout their lives, not just in their work as blacksmiths, but in everything they did. But it wasn't just about passing down a craft, it was about maintaining relationships with the wider community. Blacksmiths played a crucial role in the social fabric of medieval towns and villages. They were often seen as problem solvers, the ones who could fix broken tools, repair equipment, or create the objects necessary for daily life. People trusted their local blacksmiths, and blacksmiths often formed deep, personal bonds with those they served. The relationship between a blacksmith and a customer wasn't just transactional, it was built on trust and mutual respect. The blacksmith knew that the tools and items they created were essential to the livelihood of the community. In return, the community respected the blacksmith's skill and often came to rely on them for advice, repairs, or even personal support. The blacksmith's role in the community extended beyond just making tools and weapons. They were also involved in local affairs, sometimes serving as mediators or advisors. In medieval towns, blacksmiths were often part of the town guilds, organizations of artisans and tradespeople who worked together to protect their interests and maintain high standards in their craft. As members of the guild, blacksmiths were able to network with other tradespeople, exchange ideas, and ensure fair wages for their work. The guild system helped maintain the quality of craftsmanship and also created a sense of solidarity among artisans. In some cases, the blacksmith, as a respected guild member, could even hold influence over local politics or economic decisions. Isn't it fascinating how blacksmiths, through their dedication to their craft and their commitment to their families and communities, played such an integral role in shaping the medieval world? Their work was essential to the survival of society, but so too was the way they built relationships, passed down traditions, and created lasting legacies. The blacksmith wasn't just a craftsman. They were a mentor, a family leader, and a pillar of their community. As we continue, let's consider how the blacksmith's life was shaped by the seasons and the rhythms of the year. In medieval times, the work of the blacksmith was often tied to the agricultural calendar. Spring and summer were the busiest seasons for blacksmiths, as farmers and other tradespeople needed tools and equipment for planting, harvesting, and building. The winter months, however, were quiet. The cold temperatures and shorter days meant that there was less demand for tools and repairs, and many blacksmiths would take advantage of this time to rest, repair their own tools, and prepare for the busy season ahead. This seasonal pattern was part of the blacksmith's life cycle, shaping the way they lived and worked. The blacksmith's life wasn't just about work, it was about finding balance between labor and rest, between personal time and the demands of the community. The long hours spent in the forge were tempered by moments of family togetherness, community gatherings, and the simple pleasures of life. It's incredible to think about how all these elements, the craft, the family, the community, came together to form the life of a medieval blacksmith. Their legacy, passed down from generation to generation, has shaped not only the way we use metal today but also the way we view craftsmanship, hard work, and family. Blacksmiths weren't just creators, they were the keepers of a vital tradition, and their influence still echoes in the tools, the art, and the values we cherish today. Let's take a deep breath and reflect on all of this. Ready to continue our journey through the world of the medieval blacksmith? Let's move forward. As we continue to explore the enduring legacy of medieval blacksmiths, let's turn our attention to one of the most significant aspects of their craft, innovation. Blacksmithing, though rooted in tradition, was not a static practice. Over the centuries, blacksmiths were not only skilled craftsmen, but also inventors in their own right. The process of working with metal required constant experimentation, refinement, and innovation. As we dive deeper into this fascinating world, we will uncover the ways in which blacksmiths pushed the boundaries of their craft, developing techniques that would forever alter the course of history. So let's think about it. How did blacksmiths innovate? The answer lies in their deep understanding of metal and fire.
Every blacksmith knew that to create something truly extraordinary they had to push the limits of what was possible with their tools and material. One of the most fundamental innovations in blacksmithing came from the understanding of different metals and their properties. Early blacksmiths worked primarily with iron, but as they became more skilled, they began experimenting with alloys, mixtures of different metals that created stronger, more durable materials. One of the most important innovations was the development of steel. Steel, an alloy of iron and carbon, was stronger than pure iron and could be tempered to create even stronger, sharper blades. This breakthrough revolutionized the production of weapons and tools. The creation of steel allowed blacksmiths to forge blades that were sharper, more durable, and more reliable in battle. The ability to forge steel was a hallmark of the most skilled blacksmiths, and it marked a significant leap forward in metalworking technology. But it wasn't just about making metal stronger. Blacksmiths were also innovators in the way they shaped and formed metal. One of the most fascinating techniques developed by medieval blacksmiths was the process of folding and welding metal to create layered structures, which could be used in the creation of swords, armor, and other weapons. This process, known as pattern welding, involved folding layers of metal together and then hammering them into shape, creating a strong yet flexible material that could withstand the rigors of battle. The beauty of pattern welded swords, with their intricate swirling patterns, became a symbol of quality and craftsmanship, and this technique is still revered by modern blacksmiths today. In addition to weapons and armor, blacksmiths also innovated in the creation of tools. The medieval world relied heavily on agriculture, and the blacksmith's ability to forge tools for farming, construction, and other essential work was critical to the success of the economy. Blacksmiths were constantly refining their techniques to create better plows, hoes, and other agricultural tools. The development of stronger, more efficient tools allowed for more effective farming, which in turn supported the growth of towns and cities. In this way, blacksmiths were not just makers of weapons and luxury goods, they were the creators of tools that allowed society to thrive. But blacksmithing wasn't only about creating functional items, it was also about creating art. The best blacksmiths were also talented artisans, creating beautifully designed items for both practical use and decoration. One of the most remarkable innovations in blacksmithing was the development of decorative metalwork. From ornate gates and railings to intricately designed jewelry, blacksmiths used their skills to create pieces that were as beautiful as they were functional. The intricate designs they created were often influenced by the artistic styles of the time, such as Gothic, Romanesque, and Renaissance art. Some of the most exquisite metalwork from the medieval period can still be seen today in churches, castles, and museums around the world. It's truly amazing to think about the wide range of innovations that blacksmiths brought to the table. They were not only masters of their craft, but also pioneers who pushed the boundaries of what was possible with metal. They understood the materials they worked with in a way that few others did, and they were constantly seeking new ways to improve their work. This relentless drive for innovation, combined with their extraordinary skill, allowed blacksmiths to create objects that were both functional and beautiful, and that would stand the test of time. Let's consider the social impact of these innovations. The creation of stronger, more durable weapons gave knights and soldiers an edge in battle, while the development of more efficient farming tools helped increase agricultural productivity. These innovations didn't just improve the quality of life for individuals, they helped build entire civilizations. Blacksmiths were at the heart of this process, creating the tools, weapons, and artworks that allowed societies to grow, thrive, and protect themselves. But it wasn't just about the tools and weapons themselves. Blacksmiths also contributed to the advancement of technology. As they experimented with different types of metal and refining techniques, they helped lay the foundation for future developments in metallurgy and engineering. The processes they developed for working with metal would later influence the development of new technologies, including the Industrial Revolution. Even today, modern engineers and metallurgists rely on many of the same principles that medieval blacksmiths discovered and refined over centuries. When we look at the legacy of blacksmithing, we see that it's not just about the objects they created, it's about the innovation, the artistry, and the determination that drove them to push the limits of what was possible. The work of blacksmiths has had a profound and lasting impact on the world, and their influence can still be seen in the tools, weapons, and technologies we use today. As we reflect on this, it's fascinating to think about how much we owe to the blacksmiths of the past. Their innovations shaped the course of history, and their legacy continues to live on, not just in the objects they created, but in the way we think about craftsmanship, ingenuity, and the drive to innovate. It's incredible to realize just how much of our modern world was shaped by the work of these craftsmen. Let's continue on, exploring the depths of the medieval blacksmith's craft. Ready to move forward, as we journey further into the world of the medieval blacksmith, it's time to explore something that often goes unnoticed in the history of craftsmanship: the psychological and emotional resilience required to maintain a blacksmithing career. While we've covered the technical aspects of the blacksmith's work, their contributions to society, and the innovations they pioneered, we now turn our attention to the inner world of the blacksmith. The psychological toll of working in such a demanding, high-pressure and physically strenuous craft is immense. Blacksmiths, though revered for their skill, faced daily challenges that required not just physical endurance but mental fortitude. Let's take a moment to think about the mental strength it took to be a blacksmith in medieval times. The work was grueling, requiring hours of repetitive labor, often in extreme conditions. The forge was hot, and the metal was unforgiving. There was always the pressure to meet the demands of the community, to produce high-quality work, and to do so under intense physical strain. And yet, despite these obstacles, the blacksmith had to maintain a level of focus, patience and determination that few other trades require. The blacksmith's day began early, and stretched late into the evening, with the constant need to maintain the fire, shape the metal, and perfect their craft. The work itself, repetitive and physically taxing, could easily lead to exhaustion. But the blacksmith had little choice but to press on. The community relied on their skill to produce the tools, weapons, and everyday items needed for survival. Every task, from forging a horseshoe to creating a sword, had to be done with precision. One wrong move could ruin an entire piece of work, and the pressure to get it right was immense. But even more than that, the blacksmith had to deal with the mental challenge of constantly striving for perfection. Blacksmithing was a craft of constant learning, where every strike of the hammer and every decision made at the anvil had to be calculated and intentional. To become a master blacksmith required years of training, trial and error, and most of all, persistence. Every mistake had to be viewed as a lesson, a necessary step on the road to mastery. The blacksmith had to be able to pick themselves up after a failure and try again, even when they were exhausted, discouraged, or overwhelmed. But beyond the individual struggle, there was also the emotional toll that came with the work. Blacksmithing, particularly in a small village or town, was a public profession. The blacksmith's work was constantly on display for the community to see and critique. The blacksmiths weren't just creating items, they were creating their own reputation. A single mistake or a piece of poor quality work could tarnish their standing in the eyes of the community. The pressure to maintain that reputation, to continue producing work that met the high standards of their peers and clients, weighed heavily on the blacksmith. What's more, the blacksmith's craft was physically demanding in ways that took a toll on the body. The repetitive motions of hammering, bending and shaping metal often led to aches, pains, and long-term injury. The intense heat of the forge could cause burns, while the constant hammering could lead to strained muscles and joints. Over time, the physical pain of blacksmithing could wear on a person, particularly as they grew older. The blacksmith had to be resilient, pushing through the pain to continue working. But this physical toll was also mental, the realization that the body, which had been so strong and capable, was slowly being worn down by years of labor. The psychological aspect of blacksmithing extended into the personal realm as well. Many blacksmiths worked closely with their families, but the demanding nature of the work left little time for relaxation or socializing outside of the forge. The blacksmith's life was defined by the rhythm of the workshop, and personal time often took a back seat to the grind of the craft. The blacksmith's identity became inextricably tied to their work. For those who chose the craft as a profession, it became a life's calling, a way of being, and one that demanded a high level of commitment. But in the midst of all these challenges, there was also a sense of pride and satisfaction. Blacksmiths weren't just workers, they were creators. They took raw, formless materials and turned them into something useful, something that would be used by others to make their lives easier or more fulfilling. The blacksmith's work was at the very heart of medieval life. The tools they forged helped farmers plow their fields, soldiers defend their land, and townspeople build their homes. The blacksmith's creations were indispensable to the survival and progress of society. This connection to the work, the sense of purpose, and contribution to the community is what sustained many blacksmiths through the physical and mental toll of the trade. Their work may have been difficult and exhausting, but it was also meaningful. The blacksmith wasn't just a laborer, they were a provider, a creator and an essential part of the community. This sense of purpose helped them push through the challenges they faced, providing the emotional resilience they needed to continue their work day after day. Even though many blacksmiths worked in conditions that we would now consider harsh, their mental resilience and emotional strength were vital to their survival and success. In the face of exhaustion, physical pain, and public pressure, the blacksmith carried on, driven by the knowledge that their work mattered. They created items that were necessary for the functioning of the world around them, and in doing so, they shaped the course of history. Isn't it incredible to think about how much mental and emotional strength it took to be a blacksmith? Despite the hardships, they continued to work, to create and to contribute to the world around them. Their resilience, their ability to endure, and their commitment to their craft is something we can all admire and learn from. Their legacy is one of perseverance, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and psychological dimensions as well. Now, let's pause and reflect on the incredible resilience of the blacksmith. Ready to continue our journey, let's move forward. As we move forward in our exploration of the life and legacy of medieval blacksmiths, let's take a step back and look at how their work transcended time and place. While the blacksmiths of the medieval period were bound by the limitations of their time, working with the tools and materials available to them, their work had a ripple effect that influenced generations of craftsmen and artists. This section of our journey will focus on the enduring impact of blacksmithing, not just in terms of the physical objects that were created, but in terms of the broader cultural and technological shifts that were sparked by their work. Blacksmiths may have worked in the shadow of history, but their contributions continue to shape the modern world in ways we often take for granted. Let's consider for a moment, how did the blacksmith's craft influence not only the medieval world, but also the world that followed? Blacksmiths were at the forefront of technological innovation, even if they didn't always receive the recognition they deserved. The tools and techniques developed by blacksmiths weren't just important for their own time, they laid the foundation for future advancements in metallurgy, engineering, and even industrialization. One of the most significant ways blacksmiths influenced the modern world was through their mastery of metalworking. Early blacksmiths experimented with different metals, alloys, and techniques, ultimately leading to the development of steel. Steel, as a stronger and more durable material than iron, became one of the most important building blocks of modern society. The development of steel led to advancements in everything from construction to transportation. Steel is the foundation of modern skyscrapers, bridges, cars, and countless other technologies. The principles of metalworking that blacksmiths developed during the medieval period were passed down through the generations, and their impact can still be felt today. Blacksmiths also pioneered the development of new manufacturing techniques. In medieval times, creating a sword or a piece of armor required intense craftsmanship, but it also involved a deep understanding of material science. Blacksmiths understood that the quality of the final product was determined not just by the shaping of the metal, but also by the way it was heated, cooled, and treated. This knowledge of metallurgy laid the groundwork for future innovations in casting, forging, and welding, key techniques used in modern manufacturing. The precision and attention to detail that blacksmiths employed in their work helped advance the field of engineering, contributing to the creation of machines, vehicles, and even the early industrial revolution. In addition to their contributions to metallurgy and manufacturing, blacksmiths also played a key role in shaping artistic traditions that continue to this day. Blacksmiths didn't just create tools and weapons, they also created decorative works of art. In the medieval period, blacksmiths were responsible for crafting ornate gates, railings, and sculptures, many of which were created for religious institutions or noble homes. These works were often intricate and beautiful, showcasing the skill of the blacksmith, not just as a craftsman but as an artist. The techniques they developed for shaping metal and creating detailed designs were passed down through the generations and continue to inspire metal artists and artisans today. Many of the finest examples of wrought iron work, for example, can trace their origins back to the methods pioneered by medieval blacksmiths. Now let's consider how blacksmithing continued to shape the social and economic landscape, even as society began to transition into the industrial age. During the rise of industrialization, blacksmiths had to adapt to new technologies and processes. While some blacksmiths continued to work in traditional ways, others began to work in factories, using machines to speed up production. The advent of steam engines, for instance, required a new generation of metal workers who could craft complex components for these machines. Blacksmiths, with their deep knowledge of metal and tools, were perfectly suited to this task. Their ability to work with metal under extreme conditions was invaluable during this time of technological advance. While the role of the blacksmith in society changed over time, their core skills remained relevant. As machines became more sophisticated, blacksmiths helped shape the early industrial landscape by creating the parts and tools that powered the new machines. In many ways, they were the unsung engineers of the Industrial Revolution. Without the metalworking expertise of blacksmiths, many of the advancements that fueled industrial growth would not have been possible. But even beyond the rise of industry, blacksmithing continued to influence the modern world in unexpected ways. The blacksmith's craft is alive and well today, especially in the world of custom metalwork and artisanal craftsmanship. Modern blacksmiths still work by hand, creating everything from custom knives to intricate metal sculptures. The tradition of forging, shaping, and welding metal continues to be a deeply valued art form. In a world increasingly dominated by mass production, the work of these modern blacksmiths serves as a reminder of the value of craftsmanship and individuality. Isn't it fascinating to think about how the blacksmith's influence extends so far beyond the medieval period? From the steel beams that support modern cities, to the metal tools that power our industries, the work of blacksmiths laid the foundation for much of the modern world. Their craftsmanship, innovation, and resilience continue to inspire and shape the way we create and build in the present day. And the beauty of it all is that, while the tools may have changed, the essence of blacksmithing remains the same. It's about transforming raw materials into something that serves both function and beauty.
As we reflect on this, it's clear that the blacksmith's role in history is much more than just that of a worker. They were the architects of civilization in a very real sense. The work they did, the skills they honed, and the tools they created were all essential to the survival and progress of society, and while their forges may have cooled, their legacy lives on in the very fabric of modern life. Let's pause for a moment and think about how these skilled artisans shaped the course of history. Their legacy is one of resilience, innovation, and artistry. Ready to continue? Let's move forward. As we continue our exploration into the world of medieval blacksmiths, it's time to delve into one of the most enduring aspects of their craft: the connection between blacksmithing and the community. While we've already looked at the physical and mental demands of the work, the social impact of blacksmiths was equally profound. These skilled craftsmen were not isolated workers toiling away in their own little corners of the world. Instead, blacksmiths were central figures in the communities they served. Their work, their role in society, and their relationships with others were integral to the functioning of medieval life, and their influence extended far beyond the walls of their forge. Let's consider for a moment just how central the blacksmith was in medieval society. In the small, tight-knit villages of the Middle Ages, blacksmiths were some of the most important members of the community. They were the ones who forged the tools that farmers needed to plow their fields, the weapons that soldiers used to defend their kingdoms, and the everyday household items that people relied on. Without blacksmiths, life as the medieval people knew it would not have been possible. From the moment the sun rose until long after it set, blacksmiths were busy at work, creating the very things that allowed society to function. In fact, blacksmiths were often one of the few people in the community who could truly lay claim to their craft. While other trades might have been specialized or limited by location such as millers or carpenters, blacksmiths had a far-reaching influence. They were the ones responsible for forging the tools of the trade for nearly everyone in the village, from the farmer to the nobleman. Whether it was crafting horseshoes for the farmer's livestock, making nails for a carpenter's construction project, or creating weapons for soldiers, the blacksmith's work touched nearly every aspect of medieval life. Their work was seen as indispensable, and as such, blacksmiths were often treated with great respect by the community. And it wasn't just the importance of their work that made blacksmiths so integral to society. It was also the role they played in local relationships. Blacksmiths often served as trusted advisors and problem solvers for the community. When something broke, whether it was a tool, a wagon, or even a piece of jewelry, the blacksmith was often the first person to turn to for help. Their expertise extended beyond just the mechanical aspects of their work. They were often the ones who had the knowledge and experience to solve problems that others couldn't. This made them important figures, trusted with the responsibility of fixing not only tools but sometimes even resolving personal issues within the village. Additionally, blacksmiths played a significant social role. In the small villages and towns, the blacksmith's forge became a gathering place where people would come to have their tools repaired, to ask for advice, or simply to chat about the events of the day. The forge wasn't just a place of work, it was a hub of conversation and interaction. The blacksmith, often seen as an authority figure, would become a central figure in the social life of the town. People would gather there to exchange news, discuss politics, and even engage in local gossip. In this way, the blacksmith's forge acted as a focal point for the community, making the blacksmith not just a worker but also a key figure in the social structure. But the blacksmith's role didn't end at the village level. In larger towns and cities, blacksmiths were also part of a broader network of tradespeople, artisans, and merchants. Many blacksmiths belonged to guilds, which were associations of workers who shared a common trade. These guilds played a critical role in regulating the craft, ensuring that the work being produced was of high quality and that workers were paid fairly for their labor. Blacksmiths within a guild would often exchange knowledge, collaborate on larger projects, and provide mutual support in times of need. Guilds also helped blacksmiths maintain their status within society by providing them with a sense of security and recognition. Let's think for a moment about how the guild system influenced the development of blacksmithing, and by extension the broader community. The guilds ensured that blacksmiths were highly trained, that their skills were passed down through generations, and that their work maintained a certain standard. Blacksmiths who were part of these guilds also benefited from the protection and recognition that came with being part of an organized system. This helped elevate their status in society and allowed them to maintain a strong presence in the economic and social life of the town. While the blacksmith's role in the medieval world was largely centered around their craft, they were also part of a much larger social and cultural network. Their work may have been focused on the physical aspects of metalworking, but their influence extended into every corner of medieval life. They were the ones who helped build the tools that powered the economy, created the weapons that protected the people, and played a key role in the daily lives of the villagers. At the same time, blacksmiths also had a profound influence on the arts and culture of the time. Many blacksmiths, especially those working in larger cities, created decorative metalwork for churches, palaces, and noble homes. They crafted ornate gates, chandeliers, and other decorative objects that helped beautify the structures of medieval society. These works of art were not only functional but also symbolic of the skill and craftsmanship of the blacksmith. The metalwork created by these artisans still exists today, as part of the cultural heritage of the medieval period. So when we think about it, the life of a blacksmith was far from isolated. They were deeply connected to their community, both through their craft and through the relationships they maintained. They were trusted figures, highly respected for their skill and knowledge. Their role in the village was multifaceted. They were creators, advisors, problem solvers, and artists. Blacksmiths may have worked in the heat of their forges, but their influence radiated outwards, shaping the social, economic, and artistic fabric of medieval society. Let's take a moment to breathe and reflect on how much the blacksmith's role shaped the world around them. Ready to continue on our journey? Let's move forward. As we delve deeper into the fascinating world of medieval blacksmiths, let's take a step back and explore how their craft transcended the boundaries of the workshop and became a critical part of medieval spirituality, symbolism, and belief systems. While we've discussed the importance of blacksmiths in everyday life, their work was often imbued with a deeper meaning, touching upon aspects of magic, religion, and cultural symbolism. Their forges were not just places of creation, but places where elements of the spiritual and physical world collided, and where blacksmiths themselves were often considered to possess mystical abilities. Let's begin by considering the mystical aura that surrounded blacksmith. Their ability to work with fire, an element traditionally seen as both destructive and creative, gave them a special place in medieval culture. The forge, with its roaring flames and glowing metal, was seen as a place where raw materials could be transformed into objects of power. Fire was, after all, the element that represented purification and transformation, and blacksmiths worked with it daily. The ability to control fire, shape it, and use it to forge tools, weapons, and art made blacksmiths powerful figures in the eyes of medieval society. For many, blacksmiths were more than just skilled laborers. They were seen as intermediaries between the earthly world and the divine. Their work with fire in particular was considered a mystical act. The blacksmith's forge was often seen as a symbol of creation itself, as it was within the flames of the forge that the metal was transformed from raw ore into something functional and beautiful. The blacksmith was, in a sense, a creator, just as the divine forces were thought to shape the world. In some cultures, blacksmiths were even revered as having supernatural abilities or as possessing a special connection to deities associated with fire and metalworking. One of the most notable examples of this connection between blacksmithing and spirituality is the veneration of Saint Eloi, the patron saint of blacksmiths. Saint Eloi was a 7th century French bishop who had been a skilled goldsmith and blacksmith before his religious calling. He was known for his ability to create beautiful and intricate works of metal which were believed to possess a spiritual quality. Saint Eloi became the patron saint of blacksmiths, farriers, and metalworkers, and blacksmiths throughout medieval Europe invoked his name for protection, good luck, and guidance in their work. In this sense, blacksmithing wasn't just a physical craft, it was also a spiritual calling, and the blacksmith was often seen as a person who could bridge the gap between the divine and the mundane. Fire wasn't the only mystical element of blacksmith. The act of shaping metal itself was often seen as a symbolic representation of transformation. Medieval societies often viewed metal as an element that could be shaped, molded, and transformed, much like the soul was believed to undergo spiritual purification. In this sense, the blacksmith's hammer could be seen as a tool of both physical and spiritual refinement. To create something from metal was to bring order from chaos, to transform raw material into something of value and purpose. The symbolism of metalworking went even further in religious contexts. Many churches and monasteries would commission blacksmiths to create ceremonial items such as crosses, chalices, and altar decorations. These items were seen not just as functional objects but as sacred symbols that held spiritual power. The blacksmith's ability to forge these items was seen as a reflection of their connection to divine forces. Some blacksmiths even worked directly for religious institutions, creating objects that were used in holy rites and ceremonies. The act of crafting these sacred items was considered a spiritual service, as the blacksmith wasn't just creating tools or decorations, they were participating in a divine process. The religious connection to blacksmithing didn't stop at Christian symbolism. In many cultures, blacksmiths were associated with gods and deities linked to creation and fire. In Norse mythology, for example, the god Hephaestus. Vulcan in Roman mythology was the god of fire, blacksmithing, and metalwork. He was often depicted as the master craftsman, forging weapons and armor for the gods. Blacksmiths were believed to share in his divine craftsmanship, and some even believed they were capable of producing magical items with their skills. This belief in the magical and divine aspects of blacksmithing was particularly evident in the creation of weapons and armor for warriors, as many cultures believed that the weapons forged by blacksmiths carried the strength and protection of the gods themselves. Even in more everyday, secular contexts, the blacksmith's craft was often linked to magical thinking. Horseshoes, for instance, were considered to have protective properties, and many people believed that a horseshoe could ward off evil spirits and bring good luck. The blacksmith's role in creating these seemingly magical objects was tied to the belief that their craftsmanship imbued the items with special powers. In some cultures, blacksmiths were even believed to possess the ability to heal ailments, using their mastery of metal and fire to forge remedies or charms. It's fascinating, isn't it? The medieval blacksmith wasn't just a worker, they were a figure of both practical and spiritual significance. The forge was a place where raw materials were transformed, and in the same way, the blacksmith's work was seen as a transformation of both physical objects and spiritual force. The blacksmith was a creator, an artist, and a mystic all at once, shaping metal with their hammer and fire while also participating in a larger divine process of creation. And while the magical and spiritual beliefs surrounding blacksmithing may have faded with time, the craft itself continues to carry with it a sense of wonder and respect. Today, when we look at a beautifully crafted piece of metalwork, whether it's a sword, a gate, or a sculpture, we can still feel the echo of the blacksmith's connection to something greater, something transcendent. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on the spiritual and mystical significance of the blacksmith's craft. Ready to continue our exploration? Let's move forward. As we continue our journey through the world of medieval blacksmiths, let's now delve into one of the most fascinating and often overlooked aspects of their work, their role in shaping the development of medieval technology and warfare. While blacksmiths were known primarily for their ability to forge tools, weapons, and armor, their innovations played a critical role in the advancement of military technology and the broader technological landscape of the medieval period. Their work was directly tied to the success of armies, the defense of kingdoms, and the technological progress of society as a whole. Let's take a moment to consider how blacksmithing directly impacted warfare. Medieval warfare was at its core a battle of strength, endurance, and the right equipment. The blacksmith's role in creating weapons from swords and shields to spears and crossbows was essential for the soldiers who fought on the front lines. These weapons were not just tools, they were symbols of power, protection, and prestige. The blacksmith was, in many ways, the creator of the instruments of war that shaped the destiny of kingdoms and empires. One of the most important innovations that came from the blacksmith's forge was the development of armor. Knights, the warriors who would go on to define the medieval battlefield, relied on blacksmiths to create armor that would protect them from the blows of swords, arrows, and axes. The crafting of armor was an art form in itself. The blacksmith had to balance protection with mobility, creating armor that was both strong enough to withstand blows while also allowing the knight to move freely. Plate armor, which eventually became the standard for knights, was a direct result of blacksmithing innovation. The development of this armor required not just physical skill but an understanding of metallurgy and design. The blacksmith had to know how to shape the metal in a way that provided maximum protection while ensuring the wearer could move and fight effectively. The creation of weapons, particularly swords, was another major aspect of blacksmithing during this period. The sword was the weapon of choice for many medieval warriors, and a well-forged sword was considered a prized possession. The blacksmith's ability to create a strong, sharp, and durable sword was a mark of their skill and craftsmanship. The techniques used to forge swords, such as folding the metal to create layers and tempering the blade to make it both flexible and strong, were crucial to the effectiveness of these weapons in battle. The blacksmith had to understand the balance between strength and sharpness, as a sword that was too hard would be brittle and prone to breaking, while one that was too soft would lose its edge quickly. The role of the blacksmith in the creation of weapons and armor was also central to the development of the knightly class itself.
As warfare evolved, so too did the armor and weaponry used by soldiers. The blacksmith played a critical role in ensuring that knights and soldiers were properly equipped for battle, and their ability to adapt to changing styles of warfare made them indispensable in military history. As weapons became more advanced and combat tactics shifted, blacksmiths had to innovate and adjust their techniques to meet the needs of the time. But blacksmiths weren't just creating weapons for knights, they were also responsible for crafting the tools that were used in siege warfare. The construction of castles and fortifications required the use of specialized tools, many of which were forged by blacksmiths. The construction of siege weapons, such as catapults, trebuchets and battering rams, also relied on the blacksmith's skill. These weapons required precision and strength, and the blacksmith had to ensure that the metal components were strong enough to withstand the stress of battle. The blacksmith's role in warfare was not limited to creating weapons for the elite, they were also essential to the everyday soldier. The tools they created for common soldiers, things like axes, knives, and armor, were just as important as the finely crafted swords and armor used by knights. The blacksmith's ability to produce high-quality, functional weapons and tools for a wide range of people made them an integral part of medieval military strategy. As we think about the blacksmith's impact on warfare, it's fascinating to consider how their work transcended the battle. The skills developed by blacksmiths in creating weapons and armor also contributed to advancements in other areas of medieval society. The understanding of metallurgy and metalworking that blacksmiths developed was directly tied to the growth of other industries, from architecture and engineering to the creation of everyday tools. The blacksmith's ability to shape metal, to create strong, durable objects, was a cornerstone of medieval technological development. As we reflect on this, we can see that the blacksmith's role in warfare and technology was far more than just a functional one. Blacksmiths were the creators of the tools and weapons that shaped the course of history. Their work had a direct impact on the success of armies, the defense of kingdoms, and the technological advancements that would define the medieval world. The blacksmith was not just a laborer working in the shadows, they were, in many ways, a hero of medieval society. Their ability to craft the tools of war, to create armor that would protect warriors and kings, and to forge weapons that would change the course of battles was a testament to their skill, their ingenuity, and their unwavering dedication to their craft. It's incredible to think about the ways in which blacksmiths helped shape the destiny of nations. Through their work with fire and metal, they were not only making objects, they were making history. Their contribution to warfare, technology, and even the development of the medieval social structure was immeasurable, and their legacy continues to echo through the centuries. Let's pause and reflect on the lasting impact that the blacksmith had on medieval warfare and technology. Ready to continue with our journey through the history of these fascinating craftsmen, let's move forward. As we move forward in our exploration of the medieval blacksmith, it's time to shift our focus from the impact of their craft on warfare and technology to their contributions to the everyday lives of medieval people. While blacksmiths are often associated with weapons, armor, and tools of war, their craft was just as important to the domestic, agricultural, and commercial needs of the medieval world. The blacksmith's work wasn't confined to the battlefield, it was woven into the very fabric of medieval society, impacting the lives of peasants, merchants, and craftsmen alike. Let's start by considering how blacksmiths helped shape the rural landscape. In medieval times, most people lived in small villages and worked on the land. The agricultural economy was the backbone of medieval life, and blacksmiths played an essential role in ensuring that farming could be done effectively. One of the most important tools for any medieval farmer was the plow, and blacksmiths were responsible for forging the iron parts that made plows effective. The sharp, durable metal blades of a plow allowed farmers to till the soil, preparing it for planting crop. Without the blacksmith's skill in creating these tools, farming would have been far more difficult, and the agricultural economy could not have thrived. Blacksmiths also made a variety of other tools essential to farming, such as hoes, sickles, and axes. These tools allowed peasants to cultivate the land, harvest crops, and clear forests for building homes and growing food. Blacksmiths also created nails, screws, and other hardware that was used in the construction of homes, barns, and fences. In a time before mass production and modern tools, the blacksmith's ability to create and repair these essential items was vital to the survival of rural communities. Moving beyond the fields, blacksmiths also played a crucial role in the development of urban life. In medieval towns and cities, blacksmiths were at the heart of the bustling marketplace. They forged items for merchants and tradespeople, creating tools, locks, hinges, and other equipment necessary for the growth of commerce. In fact, many of the tools used by other craftsmen such as carpenters, masons, and weavers were made by blacksmiths. A carpenter, for example, would need nails, chisels, and saws, all of which would be created by the blacksmith. The same was true for masons who required chisels and trowels to work with stone, or for bakers who needed ovens and utensils to make bread. The blacksmith's role in these trades was indispensable, and without their work the economy of medieval towns and cities would have been far less efficient. It's also worth noting how blacksmith helped shape the transportation networks that linked medieval towns and cities. While most medieval people still traveled by foot or by horse, the role of the blacksmith in the creation of horse-drawn carts and wagons cannot be overstated. Blacksmith made the wheels, axles and other metal components of carts and wagons, enabling merchants, farmers and travelers to transport goods and people over long distances. Horse-drawn wagons were crucial for trade and commerce, as they allowed goods to be moved more efficiently than by foot. The blacksmith's work in creating durable wheels and axles kept these essential tools in good working condition, ensuring that transportation remained reliable. In addition to wagons, blacksmiths were responsible for making horseshoes, which were vital to keeping horses healthy and capable of carrying out their duties. Horses were the primary means of transport, both for individuals and for hauling goods, and without properly fitted horseshoes, a horse's hooves could wear down quickly and lead to injury. Blacksmiths developed specialized skills to ensure that horses were properly shod, which required not just technical knowledge, but also the ability to work with live animals, an important aspect of the blacksmith's trade that extended beyond the workshop. In the urban setting, blacksmiths were also key figures in the creation of everyday household items. In medieval towns, they crafted tools for cooking, eating and domestic work. From iron pots and pans to knives and forks, blacksmiths made the essential items that people used every day. The work of blacksmiths wasn't limited to utility, it also extended to decorative items such as candlesticks, fire irons, and wrought iron gates. These decorative pieces were often commissioned by the wealthy, but even the most modest homes had items created by blacksmiths, from simple cooking utensils to the metal fittings that held doors and windows in place. Blacksmiths also made metal furniture, from bed frames to chests, and they created locks and keys to secure homes and personal belongings. Metalwork became an essential part of medieval life, and blacksmiths were the ones who shaped and crafted the items that allowed for both function and security. In some cases, blacksmiths were even involved in making items for the royal court, such as coronation swords, ceremonial armor, and even the metalwork for crowns and thrones. Though their work was often humble, it was also highly valued and respected. But the blacksmith craft wasn't just limited to the practical items they made, it also extended to their role in shaping the culture and identity of medieval society. Many of the metal items that blacksmiths created were not only functional but also symbolic. The sword, for example, was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of power, prestige and nobility. Blacksmiths were the ones who forged these swords, imbuing them with a sense of mystique and importance. Similarly, the creation of religious items, such as crosses, bells and chalices, connected blacksmiths to the spiritual life of the community. Through their craft, blacksmiths helped reinforce the religious and cultural values that were central to medieval life. It's fascinating to think about how blacksmiths were so deeply embedded in both the practical and cultural fabric of medieval society. Their work was essential to the functioning of the economy, the safety of the people, and the aesthetic beauty of the built environment. Whether they were crafting tools for farmers, weapons for soldiers, or art for churches, blacksmiths played a crucial role in shaping every aspect of medieval life. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect on the immense impact blacksmiths had on both the practical and cultural aspects of medieval society. Their craft was far more than just creating metal objects, it was about shaping the very structures of the world around them. Ready to continue on our journey, let's move forward. As we move deeper into the story of the medieval blacksmith, let's take a moment to reflect on the personal cost of the craft. While blacksmithing was an essential and respected trade in medieval society, it was not without its challenges. The life of a blacksmith was often marked by physical and emotional sacrifice, and many blacksmiths faced hardships that took a toll on their bodies, their relationships and their overall well-being. However, despite the hardships, the blacksmiths' resilience and dedication to their craft helped them persevere, leaving behind a legacy that would influence generations to come. Let's think about the physical toll blacksmithing took on the body. The work was labor-intensive, involving long hours in the heat of the forge, hammering and shaping metal into tools, weapons and art. The constant exposure to heat, the repetitive motion of hammering, and the weight of the tools all contributed to the physical strain on a blacksmith's body. Over time, the muscles and joints of a blacksmith would become worn and sore, and the repetitive movements could lead to chronic pain and injury. The forge itself was a dangerous place. The intense heat and the presence of molten metal created a hazardous environment for the blacksmith. Burns were a common risk, as the blacksmith often worked in close proximity to the fire and the heated metal. The danger wasn't limited to burns alone. Sharp tools, heavy hammers and anvils could easily cause injury if mishandled. Many blacksmiths spent their lives in constant pain, enduring the physical strain of their work for the sake of their craft. In addition to the physical toll, blacksmiths were also exposed to the dangers of working with metal. In the medieval period, blacksmiths often worked with materials that contained harmful substances. For instance, the process of smelting metal could release fumes that were harmful to the lungs. Long-term exposure to these fumes could lead to respiratory issues or other health problems. While blacksmiths may not have understood the dangers of these substances in the way we do today, the toll on their health was nonetheless significant. Despite the physical toll, the blacksmith's resilience was remarkable. The dedication required to continue working under such conditions was a testament to the mental and emotional strength of the blacksmith. Blacksmiths had to push through pain, fatigue and injury to continue their craft, driven by a deep sense of purpose and pride in their work. The ability to persevere in the face of such challenges was what set the great blacksmith apart from the rest. They were more than just workers, they were artists and innovators, constantly refining their craft and pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
Now, let's consider the emotional toll that blacksmithing could have on the individual. For many blacksmiths, their craft was their identity. It wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. From an early age, blacksmiths were taught to take pride in their work, and they were often held to high standards by their community. The pressure to meet these expectations could be overwhelming, particularly when the blacksmith faced setbacks or failures. The loss of a reputation or the inability to produce high-quality work could have a profound emotional impact on the blacksmith, leading to frustration, self-doubt, and even despair. Blacksmiths also faced the challenge of balancing their work with their personal lives. The demands of the trade often meant that blacksmiths spent long hours in the workshop, leaving little time for their families or personal relationships. In many cases, blacksmiths worked side by side with their children, passing down the trade to the next generation. While this created a strong family bond and a sense of tradition, it also meant that the blacksmith's life was defined by the forge. Their identity was closely tied to their craft, and the emotional and physical toll of the work often left little room for anything else. Let's not forget the toll blacksmithing took on relationships. The demanding nature of the work often left blacksmiths with little time to socialize or form relationships outside of their immediate family. In smaller villages or rural areas, blacksmiths were often isolated from other tradespeople, and their focus on their craft could create a sense of loneliness. The blacksmith's life, centered around the forge, left little room for leisure or personal connection. This isolation could be emotionally draining, and it could take a toll on the blacksmith's mental well-being. However, despite these challenges, the emotional reward of blacksmithing was often immense. Blacksmiths took great pride in their work, and the satisfaction of creating something useful, beautiful, and durable was a powerful motivator. The bonds formed with customers, family, and fellow craftsmen helped provide emotional support and a sense of purpose. Blacksmithing, with all its physical and emotional demands, was a craft that offered a deep sense of fulfillment, especially for those who were able to master their craft. In the end, the life of a medieval blacksmith was one of resilience, sacrifice, and pride. While the work was physically demanding and emotionally taxing, it was also a life full of purpose and meaning. The blacksmith's ability to persevere through pain, fatigue, and adversity allowed them to leave behind a legacy that continues to inspire craftsmen and artisans today. Their work was not just about forging metal, it was about forging strength, character, and tradition. Let's pause and reflect on the strength and resilience required to be a blacksmith. Their legacy is not just in the objects they created, but in the perseverance, pride, and passion they poured into their craft. Ready to continue? Let's move forward. As we continue our journey through the life of the medieval blacksmith, let's take a moment to explore the enduring legacy of their craft, not just in terms of their direct contributions to medieval society, but in how their work continues to influence modern artisans, industries, and cultures today. The blacksmith's craft was not only foundational to the medieval period, but also laid the groundwork for much of the modern world we know. Their skills in metalworking, combined with their creativity and resourcefulness, have left a profound mark on history that still echoes in the tools, machines, and art we use and appreciate today. So let's consider how the legacy of medieval blacksmiths has carried on into modern times. While blacksmithing was once the backbone of society, with blacksmiths working in small workshops and creating everything from weapons to tools, much of their craft was absorbed into the rise of industrialization and mass production. As the Industrial Revolution took hold, the demand for handmade metalwork diminished, replaced by machines capable of producing items in greater quantities. Yet, despite this shift, blacksmithing has never disappeared. It has evolved and adapted, finding new niches in modern society where the artisan's touch is still valued. One of the most enduring legacies of medieval blacksmithing can be seen in the craft of metalworking today. Modern blacksmiths still follow many of the same basic principles used by their medieval counterparts. The art of forging, welding, and shaping metal remains a skill that requires years of training, patience, and dedication. Many blacksmiths today still use traditional tools and techniques, such as the hammer, anvil, and forge, to create custom pieces that combine form and function. While modern technology has introduced new methods, many of today's finest craftsmen choose to work in the same way their medieval predecessors did, valuing the precision and beauty that comes from hand-forged metal. But blacksmithing's influence doesn't end in the forge. It extends into the world of industrial manufacturing. Many of the techniques that blacksmiths developed centuries ago still serve as the foundation for modern industries that rely on metalwork. For example, the process of forging steel, which was first developed by blacksmiths in the medieval period, remains one of the most critical steps in the creation of modern tools, machinery, and infrastructure. Steel, with its strength and versatility, is used in everything from skyscrapers to automobiles, and its development can be traced back to the blacksmiths who pioneered the techniques of smelting, forging, and tempering metal. The principles of blacksmithing also shaped the creation of modern machines and engines. For centuries, blacksmiths were the engineers and innovators behind the creation of metal tools and parts, and many of the techniques they developed laid the groundwork for the machines that power today's world. The Industrial Revolution may have brought with it mass production and mechanized labor, but it was built on the same fundamental knowledge of metalworking that blacksmiths had been perfecting for centuries. Today, industries such as aerospace, automotive manufacturing, and construction continue to rely on the principles of metallurgy that began in the forge. And let's not overlook the continuing influence of blacksmithing in the world of art. Medieval blacksmiths weren't just makers, they were artists who used their craft to create intricate designs and beautiful objects. From wrought iron gates and decorative railings to ornamental swords and jewelry, the artistic side of blacksmithing was just as important as its functional role in society. Many of the designs created by blacksmiths during the medieval period continue to inspire modern metal artists. Today, blacksmiths still create custom metal sculptures, furniture, and decorative items that showcase their creativity and skill. The artistry involved in blacksmithing has been passed down through the centuries, and the craftsmanship of medieval blacksmiths continues to influence contemporary metal workers who value the balance between function and beauty. But the legacy of the medieval blacksmith extends beyond the physical objects they created. The values that shaped their work, resilience, precision, creativity, and craftsmanship, continue to inspire modern makers and artisans. Today, there is a resurgence of interest in traditional crafts, as people increasingly turn to handmade goods and custom pieces that reflect the artistry and quality of the past. Blacksmiths, woodworkers, potters, and other artisans are reclaiming old-world skills, creating a bridge between the past and the present. This movement is a direct response to the mass-produced, disposable culture that has become so dominant in the modern world. People are once again seeking out the unique, the handmade, and the personal, and the work of the medieval blacksmith is at the heart of this movement. When you think about it, blacksmiths were not only responsible for creating the tools, weapons, and objects that powered medieval society, they also left a lasting cultural legacy. Their craftsmanship, their ability to create beauty from raw materials, and their role as both artisans and engineers have inspired generations of workers, artists, and makers. The values of skill, dedication, and artistry that defined blacksmithing have carried on into the modern world, influencing everything from fine art to industrial design. The blacksmith legacy is one that continues to shape the way we think about work, craftsmanship, and the value of handmade items. While the forge may no longer be the heart of medieval villages, the influence of blacksmiths can still be seen in the objects we use, the art we admire, and the values we cherish. The blacksmith legacy is one of transformation, not just of metal but of culture, society, and human ingenuity. Let's pause and reflect on how the medieval blacksmith legacy lives on in the modern world. Ready to continue on our journey? Let's move forward. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through the life and legacy of the medieval blacksmith, we must take a step back and consider the lasting impact of their craft on our modern world. The blacksmith, though often seen as a figure working in the shadows, was truly one of the most essential and influential figures in medieval society. Through their skill, creativity, and dedication, they laid the foundation for many of the tools, technologies, and cultural practices we rely on today. Now, as we look back, it's clear that the blacksmith legacy is one of both craftsmanship and innovation, shaping not just the medieval world, but the very fabric of the world we live in.
As we reflect on the blacksmith craft, let's think about their contribution to technology and industry. From the creation of simple tools and weapons to the development of complex machinery, blacksmiths played a key role in the evolution of metalwork. They were the pioneers of techniques that would eventually form the foundation of modern engineering, manufacturing, and metallurgy. The process of forging steel, refining metal alloys, and shaping materials under extreme conditions laid the groundwork for the advancements in industrial production that followed centuries later. But it wasn't just about raw utility and function. The blacksmith's work was also a celebration of creativity. Whether they were forging a sword or a piece of decorative ironwork, blacksmiths imbued their craft with artistry and beauty. The ornate gates, delicate jewelry, and intricate patterns created by blacksmiths in the medieval period were not only functional items, they were works of art. In today's world, we still see echoes of this tradition in the custom work of modern metal artists and blacksmiths, who continue to push the boundaries of what can be created with metal. Now let's turn our attention to the enduring human aspect of blacksmith. The life of a medieval blacksmith was marked by hard work, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to their craft. Their physical and emotional resilience was remarkable. They worked long hours, often in harsh conditions, to create the tools, weapons, and everyday items that society depended on. And yet, despite the grueling nature of their work, blacksmiths maintained a sense of pride in what they did. They understood the value of their craft, not just in terms of the products they created, but in how their work contributed to the well-being of their community. The blacksmith craft was also about legacy, about passing down knowledge, skills, and traditions to the next generation. Blacksmithing was often a family business, with skills passed down from father to son, apprentice to master. This continuity of knowledge and craftsmanship ensured that the blacksmithing tradition lived on through the generations. Today, many blacksmiths still learn the trade in the same way, through apprenticeships and hands-on experience. The commitment to preserving this craft and passing it on to the next generation is a testament to the deep respect blacksmiths had for their work. It's incredible to think about how much of the medieval blacksmith work still resonates with us today. Their ability to work with metal, to shape it into something useful and beautiful, continues to inspire not only modern metal workers, but also those in fields like architecture, engineering, and design. The tools, techniques, and philosophies of blacksmith from the medieval period have been passed down through the centuries, shaping not just the practical aspects of our world, but also its aesthetic and cultural landscape. And so, we must also consider how the blacksmith work represents something more than just physical labor. It represents resilience, creativity, and a sense of purpose. The blacksmith was not just a craftsman, they were a symbol of transformation. Through the fire, the hammer, and the anvil, they took raw materials and turned them into objects of value, both practical and symbolic. Whether forging a sword to protect a kingdom or shaping a horseshoe to enable a farmer's work, the blacksmith role was integral to the functioning of medieval society. As we close this chapter of the blacksmith story, let's remember that their legacy is still with us. We still use tools and objects that were shaped by their hands. We still value craftsmanship, innovation, and the spirit of perseverance that defined their work. The blacksmith craft has endured through centuries, and though their forges may no longer burn as brightly, their influence continues to be felt in the world we live in today. If you are still awake, then I think you have to see the video from the 17th minute of the story or play this side video, as it may help you sleep better. Goodbye.